station, though we may be miles apart.
Your radio tells you I know. Listen, dear, can't you hear?
I love you.
And now, live from New York, it's Saturday night.
Hello and welcome to the Not Ready for Primetime Project. We're Gary Seath and Brad Robinson.
And you're not.
This week, we're talking about the early years of SNL. Season 4, Episode 1, with host The Rolling Stones.
And musical guest.
The Rolling Stones. This show originally aired on October 7th, 1978. Brad, it's the season premiere.
Season 4, baby. We made it.
Here we go. A lot has happened. A lot has been talked about and discussed.
Yeah, a lot.
And now we're ready to start the season.
Barely, I guess. There was literally up until the last minutes of renovations and redoing the studio and dressing rooms, and everything had to be just so for the Rolling Stones. I mean, this is a huge deal. Again, you got to remember, it's 1978.
Yes.
This is the first time the Rolling Stones were on American television in almost 10 years.
Right.
So it's a big
The last
deal.
time was what? Was it Ed Sullivan?
Ed Sullivan, 69. Yeah. So almost, just under 10 years. And, it just says a lot of where this show is at this point. This is a show who in season 1, like kind of tongue in cheek threw out an offer to reunite the Beatles. And now they are in season 4 getting the biggest rock and roll band in the world on the show.
Right.
I'm not saying this is good or bad for the show. I'm just saying for this actual episode, I should say. But for the show, it's a big deal. This is a big deal, what they pull off. We're
talking about 1978 Rolling Stones.
Mm-hmm.
They had a U.S. tour that summer.
Yeah. Kind of fallen down a little bit in the mid-70s. And the Some Girls, was kind of like a little bit of a comeback album for them. You're right.
Right. So to your point, this is a huge deal to get them to be part of your show.
Yes.
And then...
yeah, correct.
And then the show happens.
Yeah, it's so, I think this is just...
that size says it all.
I'm trying to compare it. It feels like this is the first time since I feel like season 1, episode 2, where the episode itself is not about the show. It's about the spectacle. Like, I don't know if this episode is about putting on an awesome or a great comedy show. I think this episode is about putting the Rolling Stones on television. That's front and foremost.
Yes, but
like the Paul Simon and Garfunkel reunion, obviously in a different manner, totally overtook that episode.
Right.
I think this is more about having the Rolling Stones on the show and validating this show itself, which, has been growing. And now over the summer, as we talked about in the recap with Animal House and the explosion of the show and how many more people are now watching the show, it cements itself as the show on TV.
I feel like the Paul Simon episode season 1 was, and we've talked about this, kind of like a reprieve for Lauren and everyone to kind of reset. And it was done to move that show along. This feels like this was done for the press of it all, of we're going to validate ourselves. You can look in your TV guide and see that the Rolling Stones are hosting Saturday Night Live, and that's a thing. And the Rolling Stones being on this show was more the spectacle of this is going to happen. Yeah.
And we're the show that did it.
Correct.
We're the show that brought you the Rolling Stones. That's how cool we are. We got the Rolling Stones back on TV.
Right. And the idea or the anticipation, I suppose, of having the Rolling Stones be part of the show and in the show possibly, right? And that idea of like, oh, these rock gods are going to be in comedy sketches, or the idea of that.
In theory.
Yes.
In theory, yeah. And to your point, I mean, it was a spectacle. I mean, the stories where there were fake tickets being sold for $500 a piece.
Ugh.
You had people like Steve Martin and your buddy Paul Simon in the audience, Steven Spielberg. You know, it's like this. It was an event.
Steven Spielberg is in the audience more than any other person in these first 4 seasons.
I purposely threw that name because I love how you always get upset that he's always there.
The man doesn't work.
But I mean, to the point where they hired a rock and roll tour promoter to like run security on the building because they thought it was going to get overrun by fans and teenagers like that they couldn't handle what this was going to turn out to be. I'm not really sure what it did turn out to be.
Well, let's stick with the audience piece for a second, because I mean, we just talked about the famous people in the audience, and they definitely are of the mind of the show. But who else was in the audience? Because in my mind, it did not feel like the audience was really into this episode.
Well, but I think we'll talk about it. I just don't think there's a lot of meat on the bone on this episode. I don't think this is a great episode. I don't think.
Spoiler.
Aside from the spectacle.
Yeah.
There's not. It starts off. Actually, I should say, I think it starts off pretty strong. But as the show goes on, I think it starts to get less and less enjoyable. And I don't know how much of it's the show's fault, because as we'll talk about, and you mentioned, they tried to get the Stones in stuff. You know, there's a great sketch that was supposed to be like this really cool backstage sketch with Don Kirshner and I think Jerry Aldini and you know, and the band, to exactly your point, Gary, of like, let's have a sketch with the Rolling Stones and the cast.
Right.
That went away. Keith Richards was supposed to be in a couple other sketches that existed that after dress rehearsal, like, because he just couldn't talk, they had to pull him out. You know, Lorraine Newman has been quoted saying like, it was nice to be standing and working with a dead person. So I think the show tried. And again, there's definitely this battle of the bands mentality, I think, going into it, where it's like, here's the baddest rock and roll band in the planet, and you're the baddest TV sketch comedy show in the planet. I think the show wanted to prove themselves, and they tried to do it. And then the Stones just kind of like, no, we can't. I mean, you basically get Mick Jagger in one sketch.
Right.
And that's all you really get Stones wise. I don't know. I mean, there's a story Doug and Jeff have in their book where they finish the show, and before they go to the after party, Mick Jagger's in Lauren's office, and they like put the tape in, and Mick turns to Lauren and goes, maybe this wasn't such a good show. It's like, maybe it wasn't.
Yeah.
There's another great story. There's that bad sketch where Tom Davis writes in his book, and Doug Taylor and Jeff Weingrad also commented, where the band didn't really understand what was going on. And at one point, Mick Jagger had to explain to Charlie Watts how it was a live show. Like they're rehearsing, and Charlie Watts apparently asked Mick Jagger when they record the program, and Mick's like, no, dude, it's live. And he's like, oh, like Ed Sullivan? Like, yeah, like it's a live show, dude. So who knows? And I mean, we haven't even talked about the drinking and drugs and just the excess debauchery that was going on all week, which is obviously playing into the live show as well. So there's
before we start, because we should start soon.
We should. There was an actual episode.
There was an episode. It's in my mind though, it's not nearly as interesting as the rest of this. So
that's true. Yeah.
So
I agree with you.
We can keep the episode part of this short. That's fine.
Yeah.
But there was a ridiculous amount of drinking and drugs, and the Stones hanging out with Belushi, right?
Yeah, well, they started rehearsing Wednesday and Thursday. They had these rehearsals at a place that was called Bill's, like a studio downtown, where they would rehearse all night. And I don't know if it's to the Stones' credit, but like they weren't holding back. People who would go, Lauren, Howard Schur, Paul Schaefer, Tom Davis, they'd watch. And the cast, of course, would make their way down. But apparently the Stones were rehearsing, giving it their all. Like they were performing in a stadium. And I think it leads to why, Mick doesn't sound that great. But then after that, like John, who now is a huge star, Mick and Keith are hanging out with John all hours of the night, jamming and playing and singing more all night. So it's just like a week of just nonstop, which, right. You've got Keith Richards and John Belushi, and you're going to be up for 7 days straight.
Oof. And I like that in my mind, Charlie Watts just goes back to his hotel and goes to bed.
Good night, boys.
Yeah. Well, should we just get into it?
Let's do it.
All right.
Let's go. Season 4 underway.
Here we go. So the cold open starts with the NBC tones, and Dan comes on as an old-timey announcer, announcing the time as 11:30, and introduces Howard Schur and the NBC Orchestra with the vocal stylings of Garrett Morris. And Garrett comes on and sings this NBC song.
And the ladies.
And the ladies. Yes. The three ladies come on with him. Again, Garrett's voice is beautiful. This performance is excellent.
Yeah. It's a fun way to start the show. It's interesting. Again, we've talked so much about over the summer and these literally millions of new people turning into the show, some of them possibly for the first time. They probably watch reruns, after Animal House, and they were watching stuff over the summer. But here's your first live sketch, your live bit of your new season. It felt very old school. It felt very season 2. Like you said, Garrett singing, Dan comes out with the intro. But there's a polish to it. You can tell it's like season 2, but it looks a lot better. It's like there's a lot of money behind this sketch. It was like season 2, but nice. But I liked it. Yeah, my first notes were like Howard Shore, Garrett Morris.
We got Howard Shore and the entire band all in suits. They look really nice, like 1940s NBC.
It's a great
orchestra.
set. It's a great piece.
They have, my favorite were the 3 violinists who were not part of the band and did not look amused by anything that was going on. They were not impressed with Howard Shore's conducting with his shoulders bouncing up and down. Exaggerated. I thought it was a lot of fun. I thought it was a really fun way to open the show.
And as per usual, you get the 3 ladies singing. They're 9 times out of 10, they're great.
And honestly, I felt like Jane carried that. Like she was the one right up on the mic. And
it was good.
How great is Jane?
Oh.
Well, that leads us then into brand new opening credits. All stills.
New logo, new credits, new stills. The host now gets a card in the opening now instead of just a name. We actually get a bumper picture of the host. What else? We lose the moniker "Not Ready for Primetime Players," and now the show is starring everybody.
Yeah.
And I've always loved these title cards. These are actually probably my favorite of the early season, is the 2 different images where there's like the slight body adjustment.
The cast photos.
This has always kind of been my favorite. I know a lot of people love the Times Square one, but I've always loved these. I don't know. There's something about these are the ones I always like.
Yeah. And then when it comes time for the monologue.
New home base.
Yes.
Huge new home base.
It is huge.
Less basement-y, it's like more like a club now. They've gotten out of the basement.
Yeah. Big paintings up on the wall behind them and
much brighter.
Much brighter.
You can actually see a lot.
Yeah. And they introduce Ed Koch.
Mayor Ed.
Newest member of the Rolling Stones in 1978.
Mm-hmm.
I thought this was interesting, but it is a way to showcase, I guess, New York City, right? He's talking about New York and how happy they are that SNL's here. And then he brings John up and he honors John Belushi, a great New Yorker, mentioning Animal House and the great success, and presents him with a certificate of merit. I thought this was a good bit. I thought Ed Koch did a pretty good job leading up to this, too.
He does a very good job. He speaks a lot.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel forced or stiff. Like I agree with you. He does a good job.
Yeah.
The new mayor, he was elected last year, so he just is his first year as mayor.
It's not his last time on the show either, but yeah.
He has a nice jab at Newark, which was funny when he's talking about different side like that. They couldn't resist that. And we should say it's the second time now in the history of the show they've actually had a political figure.
Right.
Unless you count, I guess, do you count Julian Bond? Yes, no, sort of, maybe.
Oh, yeah, no, he's a politician.
Okay.
So third.
Okay, so third. Yeah. But that was cool to see. And then John, the whole joke is John's bigger than the show and he could stay in Hollywood and he had to come back and he gets the certificate of merit where Dolly Parton, right. You say, like some chick with a rack from Nashville comes and you give her the key to the city.
Yes.
And Koch has to explain to him how it's different things. But I don't know. You like this?
No. That's why I stopped. That's why I stopped after Ed Koch's big bit.
Right.
I thought he was good up until here.
He was,
and then I was like, I knew where this was going.
Yeah.
And I didn't think John did a great job with it. I thought he was fine, but yeah, it was not a great performance by him. He was outperformed by Ed Koch.
It felt forced.
Yeah.
Like this setup. The whole routine just felt forced. And I don't mean the wait for it, but no.
Exactly.
Like you knew that was coming.
Right.
But I just mean the whole setup just felt a little too forced of John and Ed Koch on home base doing this riff. It just, something about it was, And it makes sense. They're showing, they're continuing the meta, the backstage life of the show. And this is a legit concern, not even just for John. And we mentioned it in the preview show, but just the whole cast.
Right.
People are on their way out. And John is legitimately probably too big for the show right now. I like how he makes fun. He only made $35,000 for Animal House, which was a huge point for him at the time, as that movie made so much money and he didn't see a lot out of it.
He says he only made $900 in the bit.
Yeah. Like some of the jokes are fun. And he does have a good back and forth with Ed Koch because he's not John at 11. He's dialed down John. So he's got some, he's like, hold it, Ed.
Yeah.
And there's another comment where he's like, not now, Koch. Like he's got some side comments to Ed Koch, which play off really well. But I mean, I feel he's just not there. I mean, in a week, he will be on the cover of Newsweek by himself, not for the show, for Animal House. It'll be John Belushi on the cover of Newsweek. He's less than a month removed from fronting the Blues Brothers in Los Angeles for a week, where they blew the roof off the place.
Right.
So it is, they've got to address it. Yeah, John coming back to be on this show, and granted, he's making a lot more money than he did season 1. They all are, and it's not just him. They're all, making their way. But yeah, I agree with you. It was not the best, but when you had probably 5 other guys who couldn't speak very well, it's a good backup plan.
Yeah,
for a monologue.
And I think Ed Koch did a good job.
Yes,
for being a politician who's not even hosting the show, but he comes on for the monologue, and then we'll see him again at Good Nights, which we'll talk about. But from there, we get our first commercial of this season.
Mm-hmm.
It is the commercial for AutoScent with Jane and Gilda. This is just a bizarre concept. So Jane pulls up in her car and Gilda's like, what's that smell? Is that your perfume?
I'm just laughing. At the end.
And it turns out that it's some auto scent that you spray in your carburetor, even though that was not the carburetor, but whatever. And then...
So she pulls up, Jane pulls up, and Gilda's like, oh, you smell so nice. Is it a new perfume? And you have the idea like it's like an interior like scent of the car, like a
like an air freshener.
An air freshener, yeah.
Yeah.
But then the whole joke of the gag is Jane pops the hood and sprays it into the carburetor, different scent, and go smell the tailpipe. And the end of the parody is Gilda at the back of this car with the smoke coming out of the tailpipe. It's just like the image is just so hilarious.
Yeah.
And that smells great.
Yeah. Oh, that made me kind of nauseous just watching that. I was like, oh, that does not look good.
Yeah. It was an interesting, weird concept. And they did a good job of selling it at the end with the whole Gilda at the tailpipe. It was a good visual.
I thought it was bizarre. It was whatever. It was fine. It wasn't great, but I think they both did a nice job with it. And then we get Dan back as Tom Snyder for our first episode of The Tomorrow Show.
And our first glimpse of a Rolling Stone.
Yes. Huge audience reaction for Mick. This is where I realized the audience was very excited to see the Rolling Stones.
Yes.
We'll hear lack of enthusiasm for other things throughout the night, but Mick got a huge pop.
Even before he's on camera, the audience is already screaming. Like they can't wait for him to announce his name.
Yeah. Exactly. This is just a typical Tomorrow Show. Dan does his great Tom Snyder stuff.
Very good.
My guest tonight is a man who is familiar to anybody who owns a hi-fi set. He's a member of the pop group The Rolling Stones, and his name is Mr. Mick Jagger. And sir, I guess my first question to you is, sir, why Mick Jagger? Why the name Jagger? What does it mean?
Well, it's my name. It was my father's name.
All right, fair enough. I'll buy that. Get Off My Cloud.
Get Off My Cloud.
The song, Get Off My Cloud, was one of the best things you guys ever did, and I'll tell you why. I was working at Westinghouse Industries back in the 50s, not in the toaster division, in the broadcasting division. I was a unit manager. I used to get me so teed off, I used to feel like saying to him, get the heck off my cloud.
Yeah, I thought Dan was fun, and I think Mick, he did as good a job as anyone does in that role as, performer.
He holds his own, I think. He does a great little bit where he starts making fun of Tom's hair at the end. I got to talk to you about there's 14 colors, different shades in your hair. Like, he's pretty good.
Yeah.
You can kind of hear the voice isn't there a little bit. I mean, we hear it more later, but he sounds a little raspy, but you're just wondering, is it because he's, just doing the talk show? But yeah, it's a quality sketch. It's a great, again, I said it before, I think it starts strong. This is a great way to kick things off.
Yeah.
Dan's Tom Snyder is one of the best things the show has right now. It's one of the most reliable. And I think this is a great example, like I mentioned before, that Battle of the Bands idea. Dan gets up and does, I can boogie just like the next guy. And he starts doing the Mick Jagger impression to Mick's face. And they've obviously rehearsed and seen it, but Mick doesn't necessarily know what to do and how to take it. Here's a guy making fun of you right to your face on national television. So I like how the show put this out on top. And again, let's get Mick out there early too.
Right.
But I think it's a great use of the hosts, especially one like this where it's a musical guest, and it's always difficult. This is always a great out for the show. Yeah. Put the musical guest / host with Tom Snyder and it's fun.
And Dan really helps carry these sketches so that it's not a heavy lift for people who aren't actors.
Let's say it now. Dan Aykroyd will carry this episode. He's got so much heavy lifting. He's really good in everything he does. I mean, this is just the start of Dan, I think, almost making up for season 3. He's like, you know what? Last year I was on Weekend Update. I couldn't give it my all. Right. Here's what I can do, because Dan's in like every sketch, I think, almost. Maybe not one. I don't know. And he's featured in them all.
This is more like season 2, really, where Dan carried a lot of that season. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And he's back writing. Him and Jim Downey wrote this. We mentioned last season, we didn't think he got a lot of his voice out there. This is a piece him and Downey wrote. And Dan's got more stuff that he wrote this episode later on. So,
well, he literally does heavy lifting in our next sketch. We get the nerds in a classic bit because of Dan.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is the refrigerator repairman, the Norge sketch for the nerds.
ABD cooling systems.
Oh, you must be the refrigerator repairman.
Oh. What a beauty. An old Norge. You don't see many of these babes anymore.
No, not too much.
That's a rare sight, all right.
Well, the power's working okay. I'm going to turn around and see if I can get a look at her.
Yeah, you just keep giving us a look at it, Shirley.
Hey, Dad, do you think we should offer him some miniature marshmallows?
No, I think maybe he might want the big ones. I don't believe it.
Too bad you're not studying overdeveloped nations.
I think maybe I'll switch to math and go into long division.
You know, when I was a kid, homework wasn't so much fun.
Oh, we're just laughing at something funny that happened on the wheel.
Yeah, the moon came out surprisingly early.
For being a sketch that we all know, the refrigerator repairman with Dan, I forgot how long it took to get there.
Yeah.
Because, you usually just cut right to Dan coming in the door. But yeah, it was a long setup of them with the president of the chess club. Bill has a little speaker that he can sing with. Instead of grease is the word, chess is the word.
Yeah. I didn't like the speaker singing thing. It was a bit much.
Yeah, it was a bit much. Like, I get where they were going with it, but it felt like it could have been its part of its own sketch, like, instead of cramming it all into this one.
Well, that's a good point, because this does feel like it's kind of two sketches melded together. Again, you're getting all these new viewers. The Nerds, they're one of your most popular sketches from last season. Let's get it on. It's all, we kept saying, season 3 ended, and it's like, we're going to do a greatest hits package. They kind of come back out with season 4, especially for at least the top half of this episode. It's like, we're going to give you all the stuff people want to see, or, maybe you've seen them in reruns, but you haven't seen this stuff live. And the Nerds is another one. So they're like, okay, they put them at home, which is great because as I've always said, I feel they play best at home. So you have the Nerds, and then you've got this Dan Aykroyd character, which, yeah, I mean, it feels just kind of forced that he's in this world. But, this is something that apparently he would do at home. And Rosie Schuster kind of made this character up and for Dan. And, she writes these with Ann Beats. So they're like, okay, let's incorporate Dan into the nerds. And it's, it's silly. It's so silly, but it's still funny and it plays well. Guild and Bill are still just so committed to their characters. It still works. And it does play well for them with the whole immaturity level of what those characters are.
Right.
Their reactions to Dan and seeing the crack and all the lines, the moon came out early. This, like you said, this is probably the most iconic sketch of the nerds. It's either this or the prom from last season, but this one, but you said because of Dan and the visual.
Right.
I mean, the censors had specifically told him, do not put the pencil in your butt crack. And of course, he puts a pencil in his butt crack. But I wondered after seeing this, and again, it's a decent sketch, again, the Norge thing is great and Dan's character is fantastic.
Yeah.
I wonder though, did they originally try to do something with the Stones and it just couldn't come together? Because how funny would it be of like Lisa Loopner meeting Mick Jagger and Bill getting jealous and kind of like a Todd versus Mick Jagger kind of thing, or like Keith, like Lisa Loopner meets Keith Richards somewhere and like is infatuated by him, and Todd is just like, well, I don't think he's that cool or whatever. I don't know. As a nerd structure, not that Dan isn't great because Dan's fantastic, but that would have been kind of a funny, and you get the host in.
Are you saying that maybe they tried to do this, or are you saying they should have done this?
I'm just wondering if they did, or they tried to write it and they just couldn't figure it out, or like throughout the week they just realized it was the Stones couldn't handle it or something. Because these characters, especially Lisa Loopner, just feels like it'd be a great character to try to put against the Rolling Stones.
Interesting.
But Dan is great in this.
Yeah, Dan is excellent in this. But it did feel like it could have been two separate sketches. Like you didn't need all of that. Anyway. Something else that felt like we didn't really need was the Olympia Cafe sketch that we get. It starts out as like a typical Olympia Cafe, except John's not there. And Lorraine's the one taking orders and barking out cheeseburger, Pepsi. Ron Wood and Charlie Watts are at the counter this time.
Two more stones.
Yeah. Gilda's doing her typical thing. Somehow Garrett now is a waitress that works there.
Yeah. Yes, that's correct. Garrett is a waitress.
Whatever. And then the whole thing turns out that John went to Greece to see if he inherited money. He didn't. So he comes back distraught and kicks everyone out of his diner.
This is the one I wanted to talk about the most because, again, they're pulling out the hits. Olympia Cafe. Again, people probably know the cheeseburger lines. They've heard people say it. They want to show it to them. And, you're getting a huge audience for this episode. So why not pull this out? But there, like you said, there's not much to this sketch.
Right.
But what they don't do, and I do appreciate this, and it's interesting, especially because in theory, you're getting a new audience, perhaps. They don't really rely on a retread of all the old bits. They are assuming the audience knows these characters. And they know, Bill Murray's character.
Right.
You know how the Olympia Diner runs. They don't waste time telling you that. So it's very interesting that they did that. And I think we've talked about this on the last episode when we saw it, where this sketch actually is kind of like sitcom-esque, where there's a storyline from episode to episode to episode, and it does kind of keep moving in a forward momentum. So this is like another chapter in the story, which I do find admirable. Again, with this season 4 premiere, newer audience, you don't go back to say the second time they did this sketch where they kind of just retread the same jokes and hammer them into you a little bit more. I did like that. Like, you had to know who John was. You had to know who his character was to appreciate this sketch. I don't love the sketch that much, and John doesn't have a whole lot to do. He plays everything kind of dialed down a little bit, but they try to get the host in. But this was a sketch Keith was supposed to be in. And after Dress, they took him out. I think he was supposed to come in at one point in this sketch and couldn't hit his cue or remember to walk in, so they just took him out of the sketch.
That's amazing.
I don't know. Do you think there's anything to that? This whole idea of like, we're just going to keep building and you need to know. I don't know.
No, I see what you're saying. And I think that makes sense. I feel like I wish that they had kept building on it in a funny way. Didn't feel like there was, like there was the joke of Bill putting pepper on Ron Wood's cheeseburger and kept putting it on.
Right.
And then John hitting Bill at the end with the menu when he doesn't respond to Pepsi. And that was kind of it.
Yeah.
And for some reason, Garrett's in drag, which, I mean.
The Garrett and drag thing was really weird.
Yeah.
I think you first see him in the background, like waiting tables. And I'm like, is Garrett dressed as a maid? Because he's not wearing, that's the other thing too. He's not wearing the outfit everybody else is.
Right.
Like everyone's wearing the normal white outfits, but then Lorraine's kind of redone the restaurant while John's away. So now they're all wearing red vests, but Garrett's dressed in a black dress. He looks like a maid. And then he has one line when he walks to the counter and does the order. He's like, I guess I work here now. Or something. Like, even he doesn't know why he's there. It's strange and it's a weird way. And this was the sketch where I thought, because these characters, you would get a little bit more from the audience, but they're not. You're not giving the audience anything to react to. But this is where I was like, oh, is the audience not into this show because they're Stones fans and not necessarily SNL fans? How much do you think it is due to the fact that for the first time in this sketch, Lorraine carries it? Because normally it's John, right? John's behind the counter. He's running the sketch basically. But since he's not there, Lorraine's the one who takes over. She's taking the order. She's calling it out. And do you think that threw people off? They didn't like seeing Lorraine as the lead, basically.
Maybe that threw people off. I didn't think that's where you're going with it, but that makes some sense. Yeah. If you're used to seeing someone else in that role. Yeah.
And then they're like, where's John? And then when John comes, he's not his normal character in this sketch.
Right.
He's subdued. He kind of plays it smaller.
Until the very end when he slaps Bill. But yeah, it's the whole thing.
It's so forced. He's sitting there, his head's down at the table.
Yeah.
And Bill doesn't answer Lorraine, and John just gets the menu and starts slapping. It's like, okay, you didn't need it, but
that's their out.
Yeah, that's true.
It was also about this point where I started comparing this season premiere to last season's premiere. That I also did not enjoy. Yeah, because I was like, what are we doing? It felt very much the same in that we were getting kind of half-baked ideas. That's how I felt last season at the season 3 premiere, was just kind of like, we had all summer to work on things or think about things, but we didn't until Tuesday.
Well, I mean, up until this point, it's a greatest hits package. What characters can we pull out?
Right.
So they're doing that. And I mean, you need to know who your hosts are too, so you can actually have some. I mean, granted, the story goes that Lorne booked, or at least started talking about booking the Stones when this is also like kind of a great story of like where the show is and its ascent is. Lorne was at a Bob Dylan concert in Paris over the summer and ran into the president of Rolling Stone Records. And that's what started this conversation of getting the Stones on. So even just that story alone just lets you know where the show is in the summer, fall of 1978.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I can compare it much to season 3, only because I think season 3, everything you say is right, but they wanted to come out and prove themselves. Where this one's more about the spectacle. I think this is more about having the Rolling Stones and how can we get the Rolling Stones on and showcase them and show our greatest hits to all these new people that are now watching the show. It's and just the show itself. I guess we say like just the cast from where they were, cast wise, from the end of season 3 to the start of season 4 is just leaps and bounds. And I think they're dealing with that, and we're going to see it all season.
Yeah. Well, they did make some changes and put some thought into some things, like who's going to be on Weekend Update. And they've decided Dan will no longer be on Weekend Update.
Which I think we all can say, good idea.
Yeah. I think Dan is probably ecstatic that he's not on Weekend Update. Instead, we get Bill. And it starts out with Jane explaining that Dan got promoted to station manager because they're still playing with the whole news team concept.
Yeah. This is my how great is Jane moment, where she has to dig at Dan about how he did such a bad job. He gets kicked upstairs. It's like, how great is Jane?
Yeah, that was great. So we get Bill on, and he's still in that Bill Murray Stargazer character where he looks at it as a promotion. And now he's doing the hard-hitting news. And
and I learned a lot.
Yeah. I thought Bill was really funny in this. He starts going through some stories and he's comparing everything to Hollywood and like, how would I? And just like, I don't want to talk about that. That's a little heavy. And just, it was funny. Like, it was really funny.
And then he throws it back to her and she's got a great reaction where she's just like, this is what we're doing now?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I love newscaster Jane's persona when she gets annoyed and just the look she shoots at people. And she does it great with Bill here. They go into a point counterpoint, which I like the way they played this too. Yeah, I thought this was a lot of fun.
It's the only one we see Bill in.
Yeah.
And it's a great one.
Bill, the argument that the extension of ERA is unconstitutional is full of the same substance that you are full of. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that Congress cannot extend the ratification period. You pigs simply grabbed at any excuse to keep women in a subservient role, to be exploited as vapid sex objects like the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. ERA needs the time to clear up the vicious misconceptions and lies spread by its opponents. ERA will not mandate military service for women, unisex bathrooms, and the abolition of alimony bill. Put that in your jock strap and snap it, Bill.
Well, Jane, you know something. You've got a point there. I've been flip-flopping on this issue all along, to tell you the truth. And at first, I was all for it, but then somebody told me about this bathroom thing, and I know from experience that it can take me up to 15 minutes to urinate if there is a girl in the same room. So then I was against it, and then I heard the women didn't want it, so I figured if the women don't want it, why force it on them? And now you, Jane, a woman, coming out for it, and you obviously know what you're talking about. I've changed my mind. You've changed me all around. And what should we do on a thing like this? I mean, do we send telegrams, or what do we say? Hey, state legislators, get on the ball. Okay. Damn it. All right.
I always love this one because of everything you said of Bill's reaction and how he's, and even hearing you talk about it, Jane, you make some valid points.
Yeah. And then he goes into a morning after pill bit and he talks about the morning after pill and what it is. And he's got 3 examples of it. And then he tosses them to Jane. He's like, here, you should be good for a year. Yeah. I thought Bill as Stargazer Bill at the Weekend Update desk was a lot of fun.
It's an interesting way to go. I mean, it's not you can't sustain this, but
right.
it is a fun way to introduce him. And I mean, he is really your only option. I mean, unless you're going to go back to Jane Solo.
Yeah, I was just going to say,
I don't know why you can't.
Right. That's really my only option is going back to Jane Solo.
But if you're going to team her up, he's your only option. Because, I mean, your next best option is Lorraine, but they're not doing that in 1978.
Yeah.
But it is I agree with you. It's a fun way to introduce Bill to the role.
Yes. And it's a fun take on Weekend Update.
Yeah, you can kind of tell they don't really know what it's going to be just yet, but they're starting. Yep. They're starting out. And I like that. You're going to watch them evolve as it goes on.
Yeah. And then we get Rosanna Dana, who comes on to talk about discos and Studio 54. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. It was fine. I wasn't like, oh, this is a horrible Rosanna Dana, but it wasn't a great one either.
But not bad. Again, not bad at watching, what is this, Weekend Update 3.0 now? The 3rd version, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lorraine comes up next. We haven't seen much of her. To introduce the Rolling Stones.
Here we go. I was going to say, here's what you've tuned in to see, the Rolling Stones on national television.
Exactly. And I was like, oh, all right, Rolling Stones. I like the Rolling Stones. I like 70s Stones.
I mean, who doesn't like the Rolling Stones?
And they come out and start in on Beast of Burden, which was a hit for them at this point, right?
Yeah, Beast of Burden was released that summer as a single.
Yeah.
So it had already come out. And then the second tune, Respectable, was the current single. It came out the month before.
Yes. They play a third song. So listening to this from the start, I was like, oh, Mick sounds horrible.
Yes.
And then Keith sang some backup vocals on Beast of Burden. And I was like, oh, he also sounds horrible.
Also sounds horrible. Yes. Yes. Correct. I was going to say at least Keith was in prime form tonight to save things. Oh, wait.
Oh, oops. No, he was not. Yeah. So they rolled through Beast of Burden and then Respectable. Both of them, I was like, oh, all right, 2 songs. That's good. And then they start a third song. And I was like, wait, what is this song when they first started playing?
Did you really not know what it was? Really?
Because they were playing... so like they changed the key so that they like Mick could try to sing with them. And I like after the first few notes, I was like, oh, God damn it. They're ruining Shattered now too.
Well, I think Mick was like, God damn it. Because then he just shouted for the rest of the song. I feel like it wasn't really he was shouting. And was this the song he was whipping his jacket at everybody? He took the jacket off and was that?
Yes.
Yeah. But he couldn't do it in the last song because he was playing guitar.
Yeah. For some reason.
But can we just add Mick Jagger to the list of lead singers who never need to put a guitar on? It's like Mick Jagger, Billy Joel, I hate to say it, Freddie Mercury. You don't need to play guitar. Just be the front man.
Yeah. People wanted him to play guitar in the late 70s, though.
Who are these people? I can tell you 2 of them who did not. Keith Richards and Ronnie Wood.
Well, people were all excited that he played guitar on this tour that they just finished.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know why. Like people were excited. I don't get it. I read somewhere that people were excited about that.
People have been saying, yeah, it's like, again, we mentioned it earlier. They peaked too soon. I think they peaked Thursday night or maybe Friday night.
Maybe. Yeah.
I mean, they came in, the stories are, they show up Friday night for the in-studio rehearsal and they're hours late to that rehearsal and they're drinking like crazy and apparently like snorting cocaine, like all out in the open, like just not even caring about anything. And apparently the legend has it at that rehearsal, they ran out of booze at some point. And Keith Richard calls up whoever it is who like distributes their whiskey. It was Rebel Yell, apparently is their whiskey of choice. And he calls up and says, this is Mick Jagger. We're out of Rebel Yell. We need to send more cases to the studio.
Amazing.
It was just, I guess 4 days of nonstop debauchery and playing and screaming and singing. If that's how they've been singing for 3 days.
Ugh.
Which, yeah, because it's a bummer. Like we had said too, like Some Girls was like their biggest album since Exile 6 years prior. And, a comeback album. It was a critical success. It was #1 on the Billboard chart. It was nominated. It was the only time they think they were ever nominated for Album of the Year for a Grammy. So all the elements are here. This could have been one of the most iconic performances in Saturday Night Live history. And I think it unfortunately falls way short.
Yeah. Yes. It was not a good performance. I can't even say it's not great. It's not good.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, yeah, I don't know. Yeah. And it's funny because, the sense everyone was worried, like, what are the Stones going to do? And how's it going to be? The network and the censors, everybody was worried. And, it wasn't that outlandish. It was Respectable, I think. When they're doing Respectable is the part where Mick Jagger comes over during an instrumental break and starts licking Ronnie Wood's face.
Yeah.
Which the best part of that is Ronnie Wood appears not to notice the entire time.
He had his eyes closed. Yeah, it was very.
Mick pulls away, and that's when Ronnie shakes it off. Like, what just happened? There's another good story where the censors were worried about Mick's pants and his clothes be too revealing, and they wanted the costume designer to do something about it. And she's like, "Well, if you want to go tell Mick Jagger he has to go wear underwear, be my guest." It was just, yeah, I agree. Not a great performance, but again, you can't underplay. I think good or bad performance wise, just how huge this was for them to be on the show.
I mean, it doesn't matter in the moment. It doesn't matter how good this performance is because the eyeballs are on the TVs and that's what you want.
Yeah. The Rolling Stones were a big deal in 1978.
Yeah.
Huge.
You know who else was huge in 1978? Hal Holbrook.
Hal Holbrook.
Yeah.
Hell yeah, he was.
And he makes an appearance in Schiller's Reel, Sushi by the Pool, starring Desi Arnaz Jr., Carrie Fisher, and Stephen Keats. This is just a take on Hollywood, right? They're literally eating sushi by the pool. Desi Arnaz Jr. doesn't know what sushi is. His manager explains it to him. And then there's an earthquake, and Hal Holbrook does a hell of a job running down that hill.
I mean, it's like a Robert Altman movie. It's, because there's all these people by the pool and everyone's talking over each other, and you catch snippets of things, like Dan Aykroyd's name gets mentioned at one point, and Carrie Fisher has an audible. I'm just saying, you can actually hear her one line where she talks about somebody liked her performance, and she gets a phone call.
Yep.
But it's like everyone like talking over each other, which is funny because Tom Schiller claims that wasn't the point. That was all bad sound editing. But yeah, like you said, it's a decent, lampoon of Hollywood and just actors and that world, which, Tom Schiller knew. He grew up a Hollywood kid. So he knew, we've mentioned before, he's friends with Desi Arnaz Jr. So it was interesting to see. And, it's funny. I was like, what the hell is Hal Holbrook doing in this? How does he get involved? And then apparently Chevy Chase, that was supposed to be Chevy Chase. Originally, when they filmed this, it was going to be Chevy Chase who was going to run down the hill and yell, who obviously had a connection with Tom in the show.
Right.
And I guess Chevy Chase flaked at the last minute. And so the house they were shooting at was a producer, friend of Tom Schiller's. And that guy was a friend of Hal Holbrook and made a call for Hal Holbrook. And he's like, sure, I'll do it. And apparently it was like game as hell and did it several times. Apparently it was like a one take wonder.
Oh, that's awesome.
But yeah, it was fun to see Schiller's Reel. It's very interesting.
Yeah. I don't know if I'd call it a good one, but it was interesting.
In my mind, I'm like, if Gary Weiss did this, we'd just be ripping it apart. But because it's Tom Schiller,
that may be
like
true.
It.
I don't know that I like it either. I tolerated it. And I think,
it's interesting.
Hal Holbrook running down the hill like he did, that kind of made it for me, where I was like, oh,
it was pretty great.
Way to go, Mark
The
Twain.
only appearance in 50 years of Hal Holbrook on the show. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it is. Well, we get Jimmy Carter in our next sketch, A Message from the White House.
Dan Aykroyd to the stage, please. Dan Aykroyd.
And this is him talking about a framework to reunite the Beatles. So it's a press conference of President Carter, John Lennon, played by John Belushi, and Paul McCartney, played by Bill Murray, talking about this resolution they have to reunite the Beatles. Oof. This felt long.
Oh, I don't know. I had many words, but long was not one.
No, I don't know. I didn't really enjoy this.
Yeah, the idea is funny.
Is it?
Well, Carter brokering this peace deal between Lennon and McCartney. The idea is there, and it's a good way, I think, to get some knocks in on Jimmy Carter.
And Ringo.
And they're still making Ringo jokes. That's true. But yeah, and John and Bill just, for 3/4 of this sketch, I was like, are they just going to sit there the whole time?
Yeah.
And never say a word?
Yeah.
And then they do, and, their accents are kind of there, kind of not there. Bringing Paul and John into the sketch didn't really add much to it.
Correct. I was just about to make the same point. Yeah.
You could have almost done like an address from the Oval Office and Jimmy Carter by himself, and it probably would have worked on the same level.
Yep.
It's the one thing about Bill. If he can't do an accent, it's bad. And he falls out of it a lot. Like this, he falls in and out of the British accent. If he can't do it, it's noticeably not good. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And the next one's weird-ish. I don't get the next. I get it, but
network battle of the T's and A's.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just a short promo for a play on Network of the Battle Stars, but it's just T's and A's, and they reference Linda Carter, Suzanne Summers, I forget who else, but all of these actresses on network television who were beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, it's like quick and stupid and over the time.
Yeah, it is very SNL. It's something very much SNL would do, but it felt just kind of like an afterthought in here. Time filler. I assumed this would be where you told me it's 1978.
Not even worth it. No.
Well, something else that I'm not sure is worth it is Danger Probe.
I can't believe it's back.
Right? I don't even know what the hell is going on here. Dan comes on with Danger Probe and sets it up that I honestly don't even know what the setup to this was. I totally got distracted by being surprised that the show was still going on.
I mean, it's more Dan, another one that he wrote and stars in, but
Lorraine.
I didn't get the last one, and I don't get the danger probe idea, because it's them talking about, he pulls out a file of something that allegedly happened, but then they go and stop the event from happening. So I've never understood the comedic premise of it. And this one's really, John's a Hare Krishna.
Yeah.
And he comes in with Gilda as a mime.
Mm-hmm. Lorraine is like a German torture person.
Yeah. This is another one. Keith was supposed to be in. This is one of the generals at the basically Tom Davis took Keith Richards' part in this sketch. This is another one where Keith couldn't get the lines. He couldn't read the cue cards. So after dress rehearsal, Tom Davis jumps in and takes Keith Richards' spot. Which, go figure, at 12:50 in the morning, Keith Richards can't read or speak. But yeah, it does kind of help define, I guess, what a 10-to-1 sketch is.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
It was also weird that Gilda played the mime.
Why was she talking?
Not have... But didn't Lorraine study as a mime back in the day?
Yeah, but she was the German doctor. No, that sounds right. But
I guess it's maybe that's more it was weird, because I guess maybe the German doctor is a more meatier role. Sure. But when I saw the mime, my first thing was oh, this could have been Lorraine, showcase Lorraine there a little bit. Even though, yes, the mime does eventually talk.
Yeah, very strange. Well, anyway.
You know who could save this right now?
Ed Koch?
Ed Koch.
Yes.
Yep.
Well, he comes out for Good Nights, because he basically hosted this show. Yeah, he comes out for Good Nights. I don't know. Was there anything of note with Good Nights?
Walter Williams is credited as writer. We should mention.
I saw that. I had that noted too. Yeah.
Walter Williams is on as a staff writer, and Garrett's there. Have we not seen Garrett since the cold open? Wait. I'm sorry. He played the waitress. He played a waitress. So he was the cold open, and he dressed in drag to be a waitress in the background, basically.
Yep.
Oh, and there's the credit, which we've mentioned in the past. The musical stylings by Paul Schaefer was there too.
Oh, that's right.
I did notice that.
Well, that's our show. That was not a way to kick off the fourth season, in my opinion.
No, I agree. Not a very good episode. It was interesting to see what they came back with to start season 4. You've got the biggest movie star, or at least the biggest comedy star in the world, on your show. And how much do you lean into it? How much do you address it? What do you talk about? And again, the rest of your cast. And it's funny, John wasn't highlighted that much this episode. And you can't blame He's Busy or the Blues Brothers, because Dan is in almost everything.
Yeah.
Now, he did have a featured role. I think we mentioned a little bit in the beginning. There was a sketch where it was supposed to be backstage at a Rolling Stones concert, and John was playing bouncer or a manager, and he's the guy running the door for people trying to get in to see the Rolling Stones. And like I said, I think Paul Schaefer tells the story. He was actually in makeup, apparently getting done up as Don Kirshner when he got the word they pulled the sketch. And there's tons of pictures online you can find. It looks like Bill Murray is playing his Jerry Aldini character again, which would have been funny. So maybe there was a John featured pretty good in a sketch that we missed, but it was just odd that for all the John Belushi hype, he's really not featured in this episode.
I feel like that's, we can go into this on a Deep Thoughts episode, but I think there's a lot more hype around John Belushi as a cast member of this show.
I agree. I agree with what you're saying. He's on the way out. So we're going to talk about John. We're basically talking about the first 3 seasons anyway at this point. But yeah, I mean, when you look at it week to week, pound for pound, he's got a lot of intangibles. That's important. I agree with you. It's a longer discussion, but you got to give credit to Dan Aykroyd.
Yeah, exactly.
He did the heavy lifting this episode. They went to the well. They know where to go when you need quality delivered. That his batting average is just so much higher. Episode wise, I thought it started off fairly strong. We liked the cold open, right? Yep. I mean, it was a decent cold open. It was fun. Tomorrow's show was really good. I think it's one of the more well-known, because of Mick Jagger, but it's a great Tomorrow show. Him making fun of Mick Jagger is a great bit. You get Nerds, one of the iconic Nerds. So they start off pretty well.
Yeah.
But I think it starts heading south at Olympia Cafe. And I think it continues to continue on that path down. Surprisingly, which we haven't said in a long time, Weekend Update was not the weakest link.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Yeah, that was kind of like a little bump after, like
a little bump up, but then you get the Stones and, you know.
Do you think they were all just so disappointed in the Stones performance?
No, but, you know, it's also because you would kind of think, again, if you buy into this battle of the bands mentality, that they'd be bringing heavy hitters like all night.
Yeah.
Kind of surprised you don't see, you know, there's not a lot of Gilda aside from Rosanna. You know, I guess you got Nerds, but there's no Judy Miller.
Right.
Which, I mean, we never see Judy Miller again. Yeah, but you would have thought maybe a Gilda featured piece, again, aside from Nerds, which was a great Her and Bill.
I think even the Nerds, though, was like, I don't think that was a great sketch because it was too long. I think it was a great bit of the sketch, mostly carried by Dan. Yeah, I all in all, I feel like the show was very much like they knew they had to get these characters on. They had to do it. They had a funny idea for the refrigerator repairman. You can lean on tomorrow. That's easy. And some of it was just kind of half-baked ideas.
You should mark that clip because I feel like you're going to say that a lot this year.
I'll just copy and drop it into every episode.
Yeah, just every. I mean, we talked about it a little bit. I mean, it's. I think it's going to be a reoccurring theme of season 4. Unfortunately, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Within a month, John and Dan are flying back and forth to do 1941. Right. Everybody's got other stuff going on. Everyone's looking for an out, including writers.
Yeah.
It's not like season 1 and 2 where everyone's in it, both feet. This is their life.
Right.
Lauren's got movie deals.
Yeah.
Everybody's got other stuff going on. So it's going to be interesting to see what the level is and how consistent it can be, especially when you get hosts that aren't Buck Henry or Elliot Gould or Steve Martin. And, you know, how does the show carry those kind of hosts where in the past, a lot of times they would try to rise above? Be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how all of this plays out throughout the season. Well, Brad, what are your best bits?
Tomorrow's show, I think it's a great sketch. I think it's very good. Both Dan and Mick are really good. And the Nerds, I would put the Nerd sketch in there with the Nords. It's just, it's classic. Both those two are great to watch.
I had the Tomorrow Show. I agree with you on that. And I did not have the Nerds. I enjoyed the Nords part, but I just felt like it was too long. I did have the point counterpoint just because I liked the way that Jane and Bill played off of each other. That's true. Yeah.
That's a good one, actually. That's if you're going to go watch it, because it's the only time you see him do it. That's actually a good call. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Nice. Actually, you're right on the Nerds, too. Like, I would revise the Nerds to be Dan's.
Yes.
When Dan is on screen for that sketch. Because the first half, there's nothing really there. And I don't like Bill with the singing, but the Nerd sketch when Dan is on camera, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. And he does put a refrigerator on a dolly. Move it out of this. Oh, well. That's it. That's our show. Nothing more to say about episode 1. Next week, on the early years, we're going to be talking about season 4, episode 2, with host Fred Willard and musical guest Devo.
All right.
Until then, good night and have a pleasant tomorrow.
Good night and have a pleasant tomorrow.
Thanks for listening to the Not Ready for Primetime Project. Please take a moment to rate and review our show wherever you listen to the podcast. And if you have a second, drop us a line at notready4ptpod@gmail.com and let us know what you think and what else you'd like to hear. The project is produced, edited, thought about, and everything else by Brad and Gary. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Join us tomorrow on Tomorrow when we'll be talking with a group of beef farmers who claim that Elvis Presley's ghost is responsible for a mysterious series of aerial cattle mutilations in the Midwest. Good night, everybody.